My younger sister ruined my wedding, and my parents sided with her. I had always dreamed of my wedding day, walking down the aisle in a beautiful white dress, holding the hand of the man I loved, surrounded by smiling friends and family. I imagined the soft music, the warm glow of candles, and the overwhelming feeling of happiness. But as the big day approached, an unsettling feeling crept into my heart, and the source of that feeling was my younger sister, Lena. Lena had always had a way of making everything about her. When we were kids, if I got a new toy, she would throw a tantrum until she got the same one. If I won an award at school, she would sulk until my parents showered her with attention instead. It had been that way our whole lives. I had learned to live with it, but this time, something felt different. One evening, as I sat at the dinner table scrolling through wedding invitations on my phone, Lena spoke up. "Are you sure you want to marry Alex?" I frowned and looked up. What kind of question is that? Of course, I'm sure. She twirled her fork in her pasta, her expression unreadable. I don't know. All men cheat. Just think about it. I let out a short laugh. Alex isn't like that. That's what they all say before they find out the truth. There was something about the way she said it. It wasn't concern. It wasn't sisterly advice. It was something else. I shook off the uneasy feeling. Maybe she was just bitter. Maybe she was jealous that I was starting a new life while she was still living at home with our parents. Or maybe I was just imagining things. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore how strange she was acting. She started disappearing for hours, sometimes days, never telling me where she was. When she was home, she barely spoke to me. But when she did, she wore this odd, almost smug smile. It was as if she knew something I didn't. And then there were my parents. They had been supportive at first, excited about the wedding, but lately their enthusiasm seemed forced. Whenever I brought up Alex, they exchanged glances. When I showed my mom my dress, she only nodded and said, "It's nice." Something was off, but I told myself I was just overthinking things. I had no idea that in just a few days, my wedding would turn into an absolute disaster. The day had been nothing short of magical. The ceremony had gone by in a blur of love and soft music, of whispered vows and stolen glances. As I walked down the aisle, I had seen nothing but Alex. His steady gaze, his barely contained smile. It was the happiest I had ever been. Now, at the reception, everything felt like a dream. The hall was bathed in the warm glow of fairy lights, the gentle hum of conversation mixed with bursts of laughter, and the scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. I sat beside Alex, my fingers entwined with his under the table. The weight of planning and stress had finally lifted, leaving only pure happiness. I looked around the room, taking it all in. The clinking of glasses, the joyous cheers from our friends and family. My parents sat nearby, talking in hushed voices, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. They'd been strangely quiet throughout the day, and a small part of me wondered why. But I didn't let it bother me. Not today. Then Lena stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor sent an odd chill down my spine. I turned to look at her, my glass halfway to my lips. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, raising her glass. The conversations quieted, and all eyes turned to her. I expected something typical, an embarrassing childhood story, a few jokes, maybe even a grudging compliment. That's how these speeches went, right? But the look on Lena's face didn't match the occasion. There was something too controlled about her expression, too deliberate in the way she took her time scanning the room. Before we go any further with the celebration, I think my sister deserves to know the truth. A murmur spread through the crowd. I felt Alex stiffen beside me. My grip on my glass tightened. "Meet the woman your husband has been seeing behind your back." The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air, distant and unreal, like an echo from a nightmare. Then, a woman stood up. She was sitting toward the far end of the hall, in a spot I hadn't paid much attention to before. She had long, dark hair, an elegant dress, and an undeniable presence. But what struck me most was the expression on her face. Not smug, not cruel, but guilty. I, I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to do this today, but I can't let you live a lie. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, my vision blurred at the edges. I turned to Alex, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I expected panic, guilt, some kind of tell, but instead, I saw something entirely different. Rage, not at me, at Lena. That didn't make sense. Lena, meanwhile, was watching me closely, like she was waiting for my reaction, waiting for something to snap inside me. What the hell is this? Alex's voice was sharp but controlled. The woman swallowed, hesitating before pulling out her phone. I have proof, she said, her hand shaking as she unlocked the screen. Whispers erupted around the room. My mother's hand shot to her mouth. My father let out a deep sigh, as if he had been expecting this. I stared at the glowing screen as she scrolled through messages, my own face reflected in the glass. And in that moment, I knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the room was deafening. A moment ago, I had been basking in the glow of my perfect day, surrounded by the people I loved. Now I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap, as my sister's words echoed in my head. Meet the woman your husband has been seeing behind your back. The woman, this stranger, stood just a few feet away, holding her phone out like it was a weapon. Her eyes flickered with regret, but there was something else beneath the surface, something hesitant, like she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to be here. I forced myself to breathe, to think. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Alex turned to Lena, his voice dangerously low. What the hell are you doing? But Lena didn't look at him. She was still staring at me, like she was waiting for something. A reaction, a breakdown, anything. Go on, she said to the woman, tilting her head slightly. Show her. The woman hesitated. Then, slowly, she held out her phone. The screen glowed in the dim reception hall, casting light over her fingers as she scrolled. Messages. A long string of them. Some were simple. When can I see you? Others were more damning. I miss you. I can't stop thinking about last night. And then the photos. Selfies, late-night snapshots. Some of Alex, some of her. A few of them together. My stomach twisted into knots. I turned to Alex, my mind screaming for an explanation. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought he might shatter his teeth. But the look in his eyes wasn't guilt. It was fury. This is a setup, he snapped. I don't even know this woman. The stranger flinched, as if she had expected that reaction. Lena let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. Oh, come on, Alex. Don't insult her intelligence. Don't insult mine. Alex stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. His hand was still gripping mine, but now it felt different. Tense. Protective. You're lying, he said through gritted teeth. And you know it. Lena's smirk didn't waver. Am I? The tension in the room was suffocating. Guests exchanged nervous glances, whispering behind their hands. My mother looked like she might faint. My father was rubbing his temples, his lips pressed into a tight line. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned to the woman. Is this true? My voice came out steadier than I expected. She hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough. Her fingers twitched around her phone, her weight shifting slightly. Alex noticed it too. He let go of my hand and took a step forward. Who put you up to this? The woman's eyes darted to Lena, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. And suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't about Alex. This was about me. Lena had never been happy for me. She had spent our entire lives making sure she was the center of attention, ensuring that if I had something good, she would find a way to take it from me. And now, when I was about to start a new life, when I was finally, undeniably happy, She had decided she couldn't let that happen. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I took a slow breath and turned to face her fully. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but I knew she heard it. Lena's smile faltered, just for a moment. Then she shrugged. "Because you don't deserve him." The words hit harder than any slap could. Alex let out a sharp breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "Jesus, Lena." I felt something inside me harden. The part of me that had always tried to be the bigger person. The part that had excused her selfishness for years. Not anymore. I stood up slowly, smoothing out my dress. The whole room was still watching, waiting for the moment I would fall apart. But I didn't feel like falling apart. I felt clear. I looked at Alex. "Do you love me?" His expression softened instantly, all the tension in his body shifting into something else. He didn't hesitate. "More than anything." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. Then, without another word, I turned away from Lena, and I walked out of the hall, hand in hand with my husband, leaving her and all of her bitterness behind. Forever. The cold air hit me like a wave as I stepped outside, my heart still hammering against my ribs. The sounds of the reception, murmurs, gasps, hurried whispers, faded behind me, muffled by the heavy wooden doors that had just closed in my wake. My wedding, my perfect day, had just been set on fire by my own sister. But I wasn't going to let her watch me burn. Alex's grip on my hand was tight, almost desperate, like he was afraid I might slip away. His breathing was uneven, his face pale under the soft glow of the venue lights. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I can't believe she did that. At our wedding. What the hell is wrong with her?" I stared out into the empty parking lot, letting his words settle. The anger in his voice was thick, but beneath it, I could hear something else. Worry. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. I could still feel the weight of everyone's stares. The moment Lena's voice had sliced through the laughter, her poisonous words infecting what should have been the happiest day of my life. Alex turned to face me. "You know I didn't do this, right? You know this isn't real?" I looked at him then. Really looked at him. The frustration in his eyes. The raw, open desperation for me to believe him. And I did. Because I had seen it. The tiny hesitation in that woman's face. The quick, darting glance she had given Lena when Alex called her out. It hadn't been the look of someone exposing the truth. It had been the look of someone afraid they had just been caught. And suddenly, it all clicked into place. "She planned this," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Alex nodded grimly. "Yeah, she did." I swallowed, my throat dry. "She wanted to humiliate me, to ruin my wedding, to make sure I wouldn't be happy." I felt sick, not just because of what she had done, but because I had let her stay in my life for so long. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that one day she would change. That maybe, just maybe, the sister I had always wanted would finally be real. But tonight, she had made it clear. There was no version of our lives where she would ever be on my side. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. Alex took a step closer, his voice softer now. "Do you want to go back in?" I turned to glance over my shoulder at the grand entrance of the reception hall. The glow of the chandeliers spilled out through the tall windows, casting long golden streaks across the pavement. I could picture what was happening inside. Guests whispering, their eyes darting toward the doors, wondering if I would come back. My mother standing frozen, her hands clasped together, torn between loyalty to both of her daughters. My father rubbing his temples, already exhausted by the inevitable fallout. And Lena, standing there, waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to cry, to break, to prove that she still had power over me. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to stand there, screaming, demanding answers, begging for an apology that would never come. Number I turned back to Alex, my decision made. Number I don't. His lips parted slightly in surprise, But then, after a beat, his expression softened. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Good. A car pulled up to the curb, the driver stepping out to open the door for us. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of any grand wedding exit, but it was ours. Without another glance behind me, I stepped inside. As we drove away, the venue shrank in the distance, fading into the city lights. And I realized something. I wasn't just leaving the reception, I was leaving them. My parents, who had spent a lifetime excusing Lena's cruelty, acting like her jealousy was just a part of who she was. The endless cycle of competing with someone who never actually wanted me to win. The years of making myself smaller, of sacrificing my own happiness just to keep the peace. Lena had wanted to take something from me tonight. She had wanted to see me broken, to see me humiliated, to win. But she didn't. Because she wasn't even worth fighting anymore. I turned to Alex, reaching for his hand again. He looked at me, searching my face, probably expecting to see heartbreak, rage, devastation. Instead, I smiled. A real, honest smile. I love you, I said softly. Alex let out a breath, his shoulders finally relaxing. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to my knuckles. I love you too. And just like that, I let go of everything else. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to go back inside and argue, to demand explanations or apologies. I had already won. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally free. The further we drove from the venue, the lighter I felt. It was strange, how something that had once been so heavy, so suffocating, could simply disappear the moment I decided to let it go. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city lights blur past, my wedding dress pooling around me in soft folds. This wasn't how I had imagined tonight would end. I had pictured dancing with Alex under the fairy lights, hearing laughter and music filling the air, feeling the warmth of love from family and friends. Instead, I was here, leaving behind a family that had never truly protected me. But I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free. Alex's hand was still in mine, his thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. He hadn't let go since we left. It was like he needed the contact, needed to feel that I was still here, still his. Where do you want to go? He asked softly. I turned to him, taking in the way the passing streetlights illuminated his face, sharp angles, tired eyes, but still the same man who had promised me forever just hours ago. I smiled. Anywhere but back. He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. All right, anywhere but back. The driver glanced at us through the rearview mirror. Congratulations, by the way, he said, as if he hadn't just picked up a bride and groom who had fled their own wedding. I laughed, actually laughed, because the whole thing was so ridiculous. So Lena, in the worst possible way. But she hadn't won. If anything, she had only pushed me toward something better. I wasn't running. I was choosing. And for the first time, I was choosing me. We ended up in a quiet hotel overlooking the city. Alex checked us in while I stood in the lobby, still in my dress, watching as other guests stole curious glances at us. A bride and groom stepping into a hotel instead of heading off to a grand reception. People could probably guess something had gone wrong. But none of that mattered. A few minutes later, we were in our suite. The moment the door shut behind us, I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the night settle into my bones. Alex loosened his tie and turned to me. You okay? I nodded. Then, after a moment, I said, Actually, I think I'm better than okay. He walked over to me, his hands gently resting on my waist. You sure? I reached up, cupping his face in my hands. I married you today, didn't I? His lips twitched. You did. Then that's all that matters. The rest of the night was ours. No drama, no family tension, no whispered gossip or pitying looks. Just us. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, painting golden streaks across the hotel sheets. Alex was still asleep beside me, his arm draped lazily over my waist, his breathing slow and steady. For a moment, I just lay there, letting everything settle. Yesterday, I had thought I was stepping into a perfect new life, one that still included the family I'd grown up with. But I realized now that I had been clinging to a version of them that didn't exist. Lena had shown me who she was, and this time, I believed her. She had never been my sister in the way that mattered. And my parents? They had let this happen. They had sat there, frozen, doing nothing as she tried to rip my marriage apart. They hadn't defended me. They hadn't protected me. So why had I spent my whole life trying to hold on to them? I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was done. Alex stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist. Morning! I turned to face him, my fingers tracing lazy patterns against his chest. Morning! He blinked a few times, still waking up. How do you feel? I smiled, like I made the best decision of my life. And I had. Because I hadn't lost anything last night. I had gained everything.